hold a toy, a little heart should
Good morning,
dance
everyone,
for
and
joy
welcome to our Child
carry
Protection
burdens
webinar.
far too
Today, we
heavy
have two guest speakers that is going to assist us and trying to understand teenage pregnancies. It's a big theme currently in South Africa. Also, we're going to focus a little bit on statutory rape, as well as the child protection matters we're also going to discuss. Our first speaker today is Carlene, and she's going to introduce herself.
Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Carlene Winterbach. I'm a social worker at Rooted, and I conduct the forensic investigations. Thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. When we speak about child sexual abuse, statutory rape, and teenage pregnancy, we must remember that these are not only legal issues. They are child protection, health, psychological, and community issues. In South Africa, we have strong legislation that aims to protect children, but protection that does not only happen in courts or police stations. It starts much earlier, within families, schools, churches, the clinics, and communities where adults are able to notice warning signs and to respond appropriately without judgment, report appropriately, and support the child in need of care.
What are the most common signs that a child may have experienced sexual abuse, even if the child has not disclosed the abuse yet?
Some children may show clear emotional behavior or physical changes, while others may show very few signs or no signs of obvious signs at all. It is also important to remember that some behaviors that may raise concern can have causes other than sexual abuse, such as perhaps trauma, family conflict, bullying, neglect, anxiety, developmental challenges, or other stresses. Therefore, we must be careful not to jump to conclusions, but we must also not ignore the warning signs. Adults should become concerned when there are noticeable or sudden changes in the child's behavior, the emotions, the body, relationship, or daily functioning. These may include withdrawal, perhaps anxiety, fearfulness, nightmares, regression such as bedwetting, unexplained aggression, mood changes, self-blame, shame, avoidance of certain people or places, or a sudden drop in school performance. In younger children, we may see sexualized behavior that is not developmentally or age appropriate. Repeated play themes such as involving secrecy, fear, bodies or power, changes in toileting or sleeping patterns, or an unusual fear of a specific person or place. In teenagers, warning signs might include depression, self-harm, substance abuse, risky relationships, sudden isolation, school absenteeism, or changes in peer groups, or perhaps pregnancy. Physical signs may include pain, bleeding, difficulty walking or sitting, sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, urinary or genital complaints. But we must be very careful here. Many children who have experienced sexual abuse show no obvious signs at all. The absence of physical signs does not mean that the abuse did not happen. So in short, there is no definite signs that can confirm sexual abuse. Each child reacts differently. The most important thing is to pay attention to the patterns, repeated behavior, and we must respond in a protective behavior regarding these concerns. Perhaps in a school context, a learner who was previously confident and social may suddenly become very withdrawn or avoid a specific teacher in class, or might say refuses to go home with a certain transport driver, or become very tearful when a specific family member comes to collect them at school. So at the same time, we must remember that changes in behavior can have other causes other than sexual abuse. Bullying behavior at school. Perhaps the child's experiencing grief, or there's family conflict, or anxiety. That is why we should not just assume, but we should take the concerns seriously and explore them very safely through the correct professional and reporting channels.
Okay, thank you for that, which makes it a little bit concerning to me, because then there's no actual indication that a child has been sexually abused. But I think it's very important what you said about we need to just take knowledge about what's going on with our teenagers. Thank you for sharing that. How does grooming usually happen? Can you give us a short version of what is grooming, just for those that don't know? And what warning signs should parents, teachers, and communities look out for with regards to grooming?
First, we need to understand what is grooming. Grooming is a process when an alleged offender gradually builds trust or access, secrecy, and control over a child. It's usually not something that starts with obvious abuse. It often begins in ways that perhaps appear kind, helpful, or caring. So the alleged offender may build trust with the child, but very often the alleged offender also grooms the adults and the broader system around the child. This means that parents and caregivers and the teachers, church leaders, coaches, or community members may also be manipulated into believing that the alleged offender is trustworthy or helpful, responsible, or safe. So grooming can involve perhaps intention, giving gifts, favors, or emotional support, special treatment, secrecy, or creating dependency. The alleged offender may position themselves as a helper, a caregiver, a mentor, a sponsor, or a transport provider, or a tutor, your coach, a youth leader, or even a trusted family friend. It can happen in many settings, including within families, within the school system, or at churches, the sports settings, taxi or transport arrangements, your aftercare facilities, online spaces, or community programs. Grooming often includes testing the boundaries of a child. For example, inappropriate jokes to a child, or private messages, unnecessary touching, requests for a secrecy, or giving gifts to the child, offering private lifts after school, or creating opportunities to be alone with the child under the disguise of helping, caring, or supporting the child. Online grooming is also a major concern in South Africa. Since all our kids use social media platforms, it can happen through WhatsApp or Instagram, perhaps TikTok, or even Facebook. The gaming platforms is another concern, or even just direct messaging the child. A child may be asked to send photos of themselves, or help keep conversations very secret, or delete the chats, even share their location or meet someone in person. Parents and teachers and communities should be on the lookout for adults or older children creating those opportunities who seek private access to a child, want to communicate in secrecy, or give the child unexplained gifts, or create that emotional dependency. Ignores the boundaries of the child, or makes a child feel special in a way that separates the child from safe adults or protective adults.
So I think grooming is also, if I can say, there's steps of grooming. They start with befriending the child, telling the child how beautiful and gorgeous and everything nice the child is, getting the child to trust him or her. And then afterwards, it becomes the part of where the child is being isolated. Your parents don't know what they're talking about. This friend is only jealous of our friendship, and that's why she's warning you, and things like that. So it's very important for people, and especially our parents, to be awake regarding who your child hangs out with. And even like you said, they're also part of the family members, doing things for the family. And we must not be blind for the red flags there.
That's correct.
Why do children delay disclosing sexual abuse? And how must adults react when they have heard any disclosure?
So, delayed disclosure is very common in cases of child sexual abuse. Children may delay telling because they are perhaps afraid, or ashamed, or confused. Perhaps they were threatened, or they may even be dependent on the alleged offender, or worried that when they tell, they will not be believed. So they may fear that the family will break apart because they told someone, or that they will be blamed for that, or that the alleged offender will hurt them, or perhaps someone that they love. So some children do not even have the language to explain what had happened. Others may only realize at a later stage, oh, so what happened was actually abuse, especially where grooming was involved. A child might also disclose indirectly or perhaps accidentally. Disclosure does not always come in a sentence or clear sentence such as, "Hi, I was abused." Sometimes it comes out through behavior, perhaps play on the playground, drawings, a sudden fear or questions, emotional reactions, or small comments that they may not seem complete at first. So, for example, let's say a younger child may say something during play or act out a specific scenario, but repeatedly with dolls or toys. A child may even show fear of a specific person, a place, or routine before they are able to explain why. So these forms of indirect or accidental disclosure is not unusual at all. It happens a lot in sexual abuse cases. And adults should take them seriously without interrogating the child. When a child finally discloses, it's the adult's responsibility, and the response is extremely important. The adult should remain calm, listen, believe the child, reassure the child that they are not in trouble, and avoid asking leading or repeated questions. The goal of any adult is not to investigate the allegation in that moment, but to rather receive a disclosure in a safe and activate the correct protection and reporting process. Adults, or we as adults, make the mistake sometimes because we are so shocked and scared and unsure of what to do. But we must remember that the child's first experience of that first response can stay with them for a very long time. I always say we can always apologize to an adult for how we responded, but we cannot undo the harm of a child feeling that they were not believed when they finally had the courage to speak about it. I think a few helpful responses to everyone is, when a child discloses, tell them, "Thank you for telling me. I believe you. You are not in trouble, and this is not your fault at all. I'm going to help you get the support that you need, and I need to get help to keep you safe."
Yeah, I hate it when people say, yeah, but that girl was looking for it because she did not wear her clothes appropriately. That's terrible advice. And I think a girl specifically should not be blamed for having been sexual abused.
Exactly.
So when we look at the sexual abuse parts, there's a lot of terminology specifically that might be a little bit confusing. So can you tell us what's the difference between sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, coercion, and statutory rape?
So, sexual abuse is actually a very broad term. It includes any sexual act or behavior, perhaps exposure or any interaction that harms or violates a child. It can include contact abuse or even non-contact abuse, or even exposure to pornography, sexual communication, or even forcing the child to witness sexual acts. So, sexual exploitation means that a child is perhaps used for sexual purposes, where someone might benefit from the child's vulnerability. This may involve perhaps anything related to money or gifts, food, transport, accommodation, substances, school needs, or any protection. Coercion means pressure or any threats, manipulation, fear or abuse of power. A child may appear to agree, but if there is fear, dependency, grooming, or power imbalance, that is not free and informed consent. Statutory rape in South Africa generally refers to sexual penetration with a child who is 12 years or older, but under 16 years old. Even where the child appears to have consented, subject to specific legal provisions and exceptions. So children under 12 cannot legally consent to sexual acts. So if perhaps a 14-year-old is in a sexual relationship with a 19-year-old and says, "But I love him," we still have to ask, can she legally consent? Is there any grooming involved? Is he perhaps giving her money or transport or food, alcohol, data, or any emotional support? The question is there a power imbalance? With children, the question is not only did the child agree? The question is, was the child legally, developmentally, and emotionally able to consent? And was there any form of power or pressure or exploitation involved?
Okay, there's also stipulated in the act, and you can help me and correct me if I'm wrong, but if a sexual act happened between children that has not a greater age gap in 2 years, it is less concerning than if there was a greater than 2 years age gap.
Yes, so it is such a gray area actually, and that's why it's important to rather consult the legislation before, because you need to take into consideration the age gap between the two children. It's as you said, doesn't raise such a concern, but it's still, you need to look at the age gap, the developmental level, or was there any other aspects involved, such as the grooming, coercion, pressure, or power imbalance?
Yeah, and I think if we look at the Children's Act, according to Section 110 report, even if you are unsure, if you are a professional person, you must report. So if there's an age gap or not an age gap, even if the children are the same age, report to cover yourself.
Definitely.
Yes. How can adults respond to a child's disclosure in a trauma-informed way without asking leading questions or causing any further harm?
So a trauma-informed response prioritizes safety, calmness, dignity, and control. So when a child discloses sexual abuse, the adult's first responsibility is to help the child feel safe, heard, and supported. So adults should listen carefully and remain calm during those moments. Avoid any panic and not interrogate the child. It is important not to ask leading questions such as, did he touch you there? Or was it your uncle? Rather allow the child to speak in their own words. You can say, tell me what happened. Or tell me more about that. But only enough to understand and to respond immediately with safety and the reporting needs. Adults should not investigate the case themselves, or perhaps confront the alleged offender, or ask the child to, okay, now I need to repeat everything you told me, tell them to all these people. The reason for this is that child sexual abuse investigations are specialized. They need to be handled by the appropriate trained professionals, such as the designated social workers, forensic social workers, the SAPS, or child protection professionals. These professionals understand how to gather the information in a way that is more appropriate and developmentally safe on the child's level, legally responsible, and it's trauma-informed. So let's say if an untrained person asks too many questions and asks leading questions or shows shock or disbelief or perhaps repeats the story to several people, it can cause so much harm and trauma to the child. It can also unintentionally influence the child's account. So this may later create any difficulties, let's say, in the forensic or criminal justice process. Because the defense may later argue that, the child's version was perhaps contaminated or it was coached or influenced. So this does not mean that a teacher or parent or caregiver should do nothing. Their role is extremely important still, but their role is not to investigate. Their role is only to receive the disclosure safely and reassure the child and document the child's exact words as far as possible and activate the correct reporting and child protection processes. The child's exact words should be written down. As soon as the child tells you, this happened to me, that adult should immediately write it down what happened, together with the date, the time, the context of the disclosure, and perhaps who was present. It is also important to record what the child said, not the adult interpretation of what the child perhaps meant.
Yeah, I always, when I do the training for our social workers, it seems like there's a lot of people that's scared to deal with sexual abuse and sexual abuse cases. So I always tell the social workers, remember, you are not the one that's going to investigate the sexual abuse as per se. There is forensic social workers, and you're going to report it to the police. So you don't need evidence. This is what the child disclosed, and upon that disclosure, you're going to seek help for that child. So you don't need to ask unnecessary questions. You take the disclosure, like you said, you write that down, you fill in your Form 22, and you open up the case at the police station. That is your role as a social worker. Don't do more harm by asking unnecessary questions.
Definitely.
So what immediate medical, emotional, and legal support should be activated after a child reports sexual abuse?
So obviously, the first priority is always safety. That's your first priority. We need to ask, is a child safe right now? Or is the alleged offender in the home or in the school, perhaps the transport route or at church or on the sports environment or even in the community itself? Next is, does the child need emergency protection or an immediately safety plan? If there are any concerns about the child's safety, placement, or perhaps supervision or any protection needs, the matter should most definitely be referred to a designated child protection organization or the Department of Social Development or any other appropriate child protection professional. So in practice, if you're unsure whether the child is safe, it is better to refer than to wait. Medical care should be activated or accessed as soon as possible, especially if the incident happened recently. So the first 72 hours are particularly important for certain medical interventions, such as HIV post-exposure prophylaxis or emergency contraception where applicable. And then obviously you need to find out maybe there's STI management or treatment of injuries and possible forensic evidence collection. So social workers and child protection practitioners should ensure that the appropriate medical referral is made. Okay, so legal support is also essential. In South Africa, sexual offences against any children or any vulnerable person must be reported to the SAPS when there is any knowledge or reasonable belief or any suspicion. Importantly, you don't need to have proof or the evidence before you report. The investigation is not the responsibility of the parent or the teacher or any community member. It is the responsibility of the appropriate authorities. So the Sexual Offences Act also provides protection for a person who reports in good faith, actually. So even if the suspicion later turns out that it's not true, you still need to report it, even just having the suspicion thereof.
A person that made a report in good faith will be protected through the Children's Act.
Yes. It is also important to understand that, the child protection process and the criminal justice process are not the same thing. So they may run at the same time, but they do not always automatically communicate with each other. The criminal process focuses more on the alleged offense and where possible prosecution might be involved, while the child protection process focuses on whether the child is safe and what care or protection services the child needs. So for this reason, professionals must consider a Form 22, which should be completed in terms of the Children's Act, where there are any suspicion or suspected abuse involved, or any deliberate neglect or exploitation. So relevant information should be shared with both the criminal justice as well as with the child protection system. When therapy is an essential step to be taken and when it's absolutely necessary during an ongoing investigation, it is advisable to rather obtain written guidance or consent from the relevant prosecutor or investigating authority, because a clear contract should also be discussed with the parents as well as the child, explaining that, we will send you guys for therapy or we will approach therapy for the child, but it will focus only on the emotional containment or the safety or regulation and the general support, and not exploring at all on the details of the alleged abuse while the investigation is still ongoing. Parents must also be aware that if they do approach the therapeutic intervention during perhaps the ongoing or active criminal matter, that it may be raised in court at a later stage, especially if the details of the abuse are disclosed in therapy.
So yes, when we speak about the emotional, you mentioned the emotional needs that a child must have. How can we also protect the child from secondary trauma?
It is also important to first understand, what is secondary trauma. So secondary trauma happens when when the response to the abuse causes further harm to the specific child. So this can happen when a child is perhaps blamed, or they are doubted in what they said, or someone shouted at them when they disclosed, or repeatedly questions them. As adults, we must remember that we should not discuss the details of the case in front of the child. They should also not speak about the matter casually in front of other family members or the neighbors or the teachers. And within the family system, families should also avoid, community gossip or posting social media posts about what took place on Facebook, or any public confrontation or informal family meetings where the child is expected to explain, okay, tell us now what happened. These reactions may feel like attempts to sort out the matter, but they can cause further harm and may also interfere with the formal investigation. So a trauma-informed response would be to keep the circle as small as possible. Protect the child's dignity. That's your number one priority as well. And make sure the child does not have to sit in the same room as the alleged offender.
I agree. And I think, when communities start gossiping about what happened to a child, there's also a few myths about sexual abuse and also teenage pregnancy that are very harmful to children and the survivors. Can you take us through some of those myths?
Yes. So one of the most harmful myths, I would say, is that children usually lie about sexual abuse. While false allegations, it can occur, that these incidents never happened. But disclosures and concerns should always be taken seriously, and it should be responded through the correct professional and legal process. Another myth is that, abuse is mostly committed by strangers. While in reality and in practice itself, many children are abused by someone that they know, or they trusted, or they depend on that person. A further harmful myth is also that only girls are sexually abused. But boys can also be sexually abused, but they may be even less likely than girls to disclose because of the shame or the fear, the stigma, or ideas around masculinity, or the fear that they will not be believed. Another myth is that teenage pregnancy is simply the result of irresponsible behavior, or children growing up too fast, or in many cases, especially when the child is under 16. Pregnancy may point to statutory rape, for instance, perhaps coercion, or even grooming, or even exploitation, or any abuse of power. Within the 2024-2025 financial year, so South Africa recorded 117,195 births to girls aged 10 to 19, and pregnancies among children aged 10 to 14, which remains a serious child protection concern. A pregnant child should not be shamed. She should be protected, supported and properly assessed. It is also so harmful to believe that if a child did not fight back, or she screamed, or he didn't report it immediately, it was not abuse. Many children freeze, or they comply. They dissociate or remain silent because of fear or the grooming process involved. They are perhaps confused, or there were threats made, or they are dependent on the alleged offender. Another damaging myth is that if the child went back to the alleged offender or accepted gifts or continued contact, then it could not really have been abuse. In reality, grooming and dependency often make it so difficult for children to break contact, especially when the offender provides the emotional support. Remember, myths protect alleged offenders and silence children. Accurate information helps adults respond with protection instead of judgment.
How does sexual abuse affect the child?
So when we think about sexual abuse, it can affect every part of a child's life. When we think about the emotional component, emotionally, a child may experience perhaps anxiety or depression, or perhaps fear or shame or anger or guilt. They may have low self-worth or perhaps any trauma symptoms. So at school, we may see concentration problems or poor memory or any absenteeism from school. We will see also declining their marks or behavioral problems. They might pick up with conflict with peers or avoidance of certain places or people. So in relationships, abuse can affect a child's trust, their boundaries, and their attachment. So some children may become more withdrawn, others may become more overly compliant or vulnerable to further exploitation. So developmentally, sexual abuse can affect a child's sense of safety, their body ownership, their own identity, and emotional regulation. But with early support, then children can definitely heal from it. A learner who was perhaps performing well may suddenly stop completing their homework, or they might avoid school bathrooms, or they may become more aggressive in class, or they would refuse to attend aftercare. So a teenager might start using substances, or entering the risky relationship, or missing school because he or she feels unsafe or they feel ashamed. In pregnancy cases, the learner may face stigma, health risks, interrupted schooling, and pressure to leave the school, even though education and support remain extremely important. So South Africa's learner pregnancy policy recognizes the need to prevent and manage the learner pregnancy while still supporting the pregnant learner's access to education and the appropriate services. So abuse does not only affect what happened to the child, it affects how the child sees themselves, others, and the world around them.
Okay, so when a child has suffered sexual abuse, I know it's important for us to really pitch up and be there for them. But I'm also wondering what communities can do to create the safer environments where children feel believed, protected, and supported, especially when they do speak out.
Yes, definitely. So communities can create safety when they make child protection everyone's responsibility. It's not just one person's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. This means that families and schools and the churches or sports clubs, the clinics and the community organizations must have clear safeguarding rules, clear boundaries, and then also clear reporting pathways. Children should be taught about their body safety, about their boundaries, and unsafe secrets. They should be taught about consent and how to identify trusted adults. But we must be so careful not to place the responsibility on children to protect themselves. The main responsibility still remains with adults, the professionals, or organizations and the communities to create those safe environments for them. Adults should be trained to respond calmly, listen without judgment, avoid any leading questions, and report appropriately. A child who discloses abuse or maybe becomes pregnant should not be shamed or blamed or isolated. The focus should still be on, their safety, on their support, the accountability and protection of children. It is also very important to emphasize that reporting is not only the responsibility of us as social workers or on the teachers or police officers. In South Africa, child protection is everyone's responsibility. Both the Children's Act and the criminal law framework dealing with sexual abuse or sexual offenses create duties to report concerns relating to a child abuse or any sexual offenses, neglect, and possible exploitation. This means that where there is a reasonable suspicion of sexual abuse, any suspicion of sexual abuse, or any suspicion of perhaps exploitation, Adults should not wait for proof before they act on it. Communities must remember that they must also challenge harmful attitudes, such as, this is a family matter, or no, we don't involve the police. No, she is lying or he is lying. We must protect the family name. Sexual abuse is not a private family issue. It's a child protection and criminal justice issue. A school can create perhaps a simple reporting pathway where learners know exactly which teacher or which counselor or social worker or any safeguarding person they can approach. The school can also train staff on what to do when a child discloses and also what not to do. A church can possibly make sure that no adult is alone with a child behind closed doors, or that youth leaders are screened and supervised. And that there is a clear rules around transport or counseling or sleepovers especially, camps and private messaging. A sports club can require 2 adult supervision during transport or changing room situations, tours and practices. Coaches should not be privately messaging children late at night or offering one-on-one lifts without the knowledge of any parent. And organizational safeguards in this regard is very important. A safe community is not one where abuse is hidden. A safe community is one where children are heard, where they are believed, and where they are protected and supported. Child protection is everyone's responsibility, not just one.
So we all know it takes a village to raise a child, and especially when we speak about sexual abuse matters, we all have the responsibility to speak up for children. Thank you, Carlene. Thank you for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been so valuable. I want to close off and say, if we want to protect children, we need to create communities where children are not silenced by fear or shame or disbelief. The responsibility is not on children to protect themselves from abuse. The responsibility is on us as adults, the families, any professional, and the systems and communities to create safety, to respond appropriately, and act when there are concerns. Every child deserves to be believed. They deserve to be protected, and they deserve to be supported.